Hi, Peter Charles here of Hooked for Life Fly Fishing. And today we're going to tie another classic steelhead pattern. This time it's going to be the original skunk. Those of you who are familiar with the skunk might be more thinking in terms of the green butt skunk, but this is the way it was originally tied without that green butt or other colored butt on the end of it. And I thought it'd be a great way to get into the skunk series because there's quite a few of them out there. The only thing I'm doing a little differently on this pattern this time is the original called for polar bear wing, and I'm going to be using bucktail instead. I know, there's not a lot of availability of polar bear, and there shouldn't be considering the threats they're under these days. So I'm going with the bucktail, but apart from that, it's basically the same pattern. So let's get into it. Our hook is a Mustad salmon single in a size 4. You could use a size 6 or a size 2. Anything in that range is going to work. Our thread is uni-thread black in a 6/0. The tail is red saddle hackle. Our rib is a uni-French medium oval in silver. Our body is a black chenille. Now, this is a relatively fine chenille. I don't like the really thick, bulky stuff for this kind of fly. So if you're into tying these traditional patterns with chenille, try and find the thin stuff and buy good quality stuff. I bought some cheap crap from a craft store once and it all came apart and I tied up a whole bunch of green butt skunks. The dye ran. I ended up with some ugly color for the green and it was brutal. So yeah, buy the good stuff. The collar is a black caulk. I would prefer caulk because it is spiky and it will vibrate well in the water, and that's what the original pattern calls for. And finally, the wing is white bucktail, and as I said before, it's a substitute for the polar bear. Maybe this is a time to talk about substitution, because you have the option to substitute materials when you're missing something, or perhaps you just don't want to use it because you don't like it. Think through the substitution and say, what's the closest? How is it going to move in the water? What is it going to look like in the water? And I had a choice between bucktail and calftail, and either one would have worked. I kind of went with the bucktail because it's a bit more like polar bear in that it's relatively straight. Okay, let's get tying. Let's get our thread on. Take the thread just past the point of the hook. Now we're going to get our red saddle hackle, pick off about 1/4 inch worth. Try and keep it straight when you pull it off, the end straight. And just put that in there and just use a couple of pinch loops to hold it in place. If you don't like the look of it, and that one's a little spiky for me, I'm going to do one little turn right there. There we go, that's a bit better. Don't be afraid to back up if something's not gone right. Okay, now we're just going to put in our silver rib. Now here's a little trick when you're working with chenille. You notice I've pulled off a little bit of the chenille to expose the core. That gives me a tying in point and it doesn't produce bulk. And just wind this all forward. Okay, I'm going to start off with a lot of tension here because we have this bump. So what I'm going to do is squish the chenille down by pulling tight, and as we come off the bump, I'm going to back off the tension. I'm going to keep the wraps close together so the chenille puffs up, but I do not want to overlap. Stop at the return, don't go any further. We need room in here for the rest of our materials. This is a good place to stop. Now if I brought that chenille further ahead, when I tie my wing would be standing up like this. By leaving some room here, it allows my wing to set down a bit so I don't have the fly coming through the water looking like that. I'm always thinking about what this thing is going to look like when we get it wet and we start to swing it. Okay, let's start with the rib. This is where the rotary vise comes in handy. I've just tucked that underneath so it'll be neat. Okay, let's look at this. So this is my black cock. You see I've trimmed off one side, and I've got that little triangle as a tying in point. When you pick a feather, make some decisions. This feather's not very webby, which is what I want. I want that spiky hackle. But I also took a look at the quill, and the quill is relatively thick on this feather. So what that means is if I want to wrap it on 5 or 6 times, I'm going to take up a lot of room because of the thickness of that quill. So I've sort of chosen my feather and the length of the barbs here, so I only get about 3 turns roughly, and I'm done. And that's all I'm looking for. So keep that in mind when you are picking feathers off of a cape. You know, look at the quill size, look at the length of the barbs, look at whether webby or not webby, and make your selection according to what you need for the fly. Don't just pick a feather off and start using it. Now, a lot of people won't bother, but I like hackle pliers for this job. Now, as you wind it on, make sure those barbs point backwards. And if they're not cooperating, don't be afraid to fold them back. Sometimes one will get trapped underneath, and that's fly tying. These are natural materials. Now keep that quill underneath. Don't let it pop up. Got a couple of tight wraps in there. Okay, now for bucktail, pick off a decent sized clump from the tip section, and then when we cut it off, strip off out the short bits, because the base of this, where you cut it off, is going to have a lot of short bits in it, so make sure you pull those out before you use them. Then put in a hair stacker. With a lot of my flies I don't use a stacker, but on this one it's kind of traditional to use a stacker. So now set that wing so it goes about halfway back on the tail. Now when I tie bucktail in this fashion, I put it in towards me on the side of the hook. So as I wind it, it goes round. If you started on top, it would flip over the other side. Now pull some nice tight wraps in there, because when we cut this, we don't want it moving. Come in with your scissors. There we go. Now just carefully and smoothly wrap that down. I get it skidding off a little bit, but that's okay. Fill that up. Now I want to make sure it's black all the way around. Yeah, okay, we'll just work our way back. Finish. There you go, the original skunk in all its glory. Classic colors of white, black, and red, with a bit of silver flash to make it sparkle. Fish can't resist it. So it's been a proven winner for years. Give one a try and go fishing and catch lots with it. Cheers.